When I was younger, I never truly understood the concept of time. It felt infinite. Like an endless river flowing toward a distant, unknowable horizon. Days stretched long, filled with plans, possibilities, and a kind of naive certainty that there would always be more. But now, at 70, I find myself sitting by the banks of that same river, watching the current carry away the moments that once felt so abundant. There's no urgency in my tone as I say this, only reflection. Life has a way of teaching you its lessons quietly. In the space between the mundane and the extraordinary. You don't always realize you're learning them until much later. These days, time feels different. It's no longer a commodity to be spent carelessly but a treasure to be cherished. I wake up early now. Not because I have somewhere to be, but because the morning light streaming through the curtains feels like a gift. I savor it. The same way I savor the warmth of my coffee cup in my hands or the sound of the birds greeting the day. Small things. Really. The kind of moments you might overlook when you're younger. Rushing from one thing to the next. But to me, these moments are the jewels in life's crown. In my youth, I believed life was about filling every hour with purpose and every interaction with meaning. I worked hard. Surrounded myself with people. And thought that staying busy was the key to fulfillment. But as the years passed, I started to notice something: busyness doesn't always equal happiness. Sometimes it's just noise. I remember the realization creeping in slowly. Like the way shadows stretch longer in the late afternoon. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, just a quiet shift in perspective. The days packed with activity left me feeling hollow at times. While the quieter ones, spent sitting under a tree or watching my granddaughter discover the world, filled me with a peace I hadn't known I needed. Now, I live with more intention. It's not about how much I can pack into a day but how meaningful each moment feels. I've stopped saying yes to obligations out of guilt or habit and started reserving my energy for what truly matters. That's the thing about aging: you realize energy is as finite as time. And you learn to spend it wisely. There's a paradox here. Of course, life feels both simpler and more complicated than it did when I was younger. Simpler because I no longer feel the need to prove myself to anyone. And more complicated because I've become keenly aware of how fragile and fleeting everything is. The trick, I've found, is to make peace with that fragility. To see it not as something to fear but as a reason to live fully. Even in the quietest of moments. It's funny, isn't it? The things that seemed so important when I was 30 or 40 now feel like distractions. Career milestones. Social obligations. Even some relationships, all of it fades into the background when compared to the richness of a morning walk or the laughter of a child. I know I'm not alone in this shift. I see it in others my age too. This turning inward. This quiet appreciation for the smaller things. It's not about withdrawing from life but about engaging with it differently. More deliberately. When you're young, life is about adding experiences. Adding people. Adding achievements. At 70, it's more about subtracting. About distilling life down to its essence and focusing on what truly matters. If there's one thing I wish I could tell my younger self, it's this: don't wait to appreciate the simple things. Don't wait until the river's current has slowed to savor the feel of the water on your skin. Because in the end, it's not the big moments that define a life, it's the accumulation of the small ones. The quiet, unremarkable minutes that add up to something extraordinary. And so, I sit here now, watching the river of time flow by. I'm not in a hurry to leave its banks. I've learned that the best way to honor time is to simply be still and let it move around you. There's no need to fight the current, it carries you where you're meant to go. Whether you realize it or not. Life, as I've experienced it, is full of quiet contradictions. On the surface, everything can appear calm, orderly, even predictable. But beneath that surface lies an undercurrent of complexity, a tension that reveals itself in moments you least expect. At 70, I've lived through enough of these moments to recognize them for what they are. Even if I don't always have the words to explain them. Take something as simple as a friendly exchange at the grocery store. I'm standing in line, waiting to pay, when the cashier greets the person ahead of me with a wide smile, no warm, easy conversation. The kind that makes you feel seen. Even if just for a moment. But when it's my turn, her demeanor shifts. The smile is still there. But it's smaller. More reserved. Her tone becomes polite. Almost mechanical. It's subtle, so subtle that if I mentioned it to someone, they might think I was imagining it. But it's there. Unmistakably. A quiet reminder that not all interactions are created equal. This is the kind of thing I've come to notice more as I've grown older. It's not always outright hostility or conflict, it's the small, almost imperceptible ways we navigate our differences. Often without even realizing it. And while these moments might seem insignificant on their own, they accumulate over time. Like drops of water wearing down a stone. I've seen this tension play out in bigger ways. 2. In the workplace. Where assumptions about my abilities often came before I had the chance to prove myself. In neighborhoods. Where I was either welcomed cautiously or outright ignored. Depending on which side of town I happened to be in. And even in friendships. Where the unspoken rules of what could or couldn't be discussed created barriers that were hard to break through. What strikes me most is how these tensions often go unacknowledged. People don't like to talk about them. Perhaps because it's uncomfortable to admit they exist. But ignoring them doesn't make them go away. If anything, it gives them more power. Allowing them to persist in the background. Shaping how we see and interact with one another. As I look back on my life, I realize that much of it has been spent trying to bridge these divides. Even when it wasn't easy. There were times I succeeded and times I failed. I've had friendships that flourished despite our differences and others that withered under the weight of what couldn't be said. And through it all, I've learned that the only way to truly address these tensions is to face them head-on, not with anger or accusation, but with honesty and an open heart. At this stage in my life, I've also learned to accept that some tensions may never be resolved. The world is complex. And people are. Too. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. There's value in the effort. In the conversations that challenge us. And in the moments of understanding that emerge when we're willing to listen. Living through these experiences has taught me to approach life with both caution and hope. Caution. Because I know that not everyone sees the world the same way I do. And hope. Because I've also seen how small acts of kindness, simple gestures like a genuine smile or a thoughtful word can dissolve even the deepest tensions. If only for a moment. It's this hope that keeps me moving forward. Even as I navigate the quiet complexities of daily life. It reminds me that while the world may never be perfect, it's still full of opportunities to connect. To understand. And, perhaps, to make things just a little bit better for those who come after us. Trust is a fragile thing. When I was young, I thought it was as solid as the ground beneath my feet, something given freely. Naturally. Without question. It seemed simple back then. You trusted people because they were family. Friends. Neighbors. Or co-workers. You trusted because you wanted to believe the best in them. But life, as it often does, had its way of complicating that notion. Over the years, I've come to realize that trust isn't just fragile, it's elusive. It ebbs and flows. Gained in moments of kindness and lost in the quiet betrayals that often go unspoken. The funny thing is, it's not the grand betrayals that leave the deepest scars. It's the smaller ones, a promise forgotten. A confidence shared when it shouldn't have been. Or a kindness that goes unacknowledged. These are the moments that linger, making you hesitate the next time someone asks you to believe in them. I've felt this hesitation more keenly as I've aged. It's not bitterness that makes me cautious but experience. There's a difference. You see, bitterness is a weight that drags you down, while experience sharpens your perspective, teaching you to see the world as it truly is, not as you wish it to be. When I think back on the people who've come and gone in my life, I see a pattern. Some relationships were built on genuine care and mutual respect, while others were built on something far more tenuous: convenience, obligation, or even pretense. It's the latter kind that taught me the hardest lessons. I remember a friend from my younger years. Someone I trusted completely. We laughed together, worked together, and shared dreams of what our lives might become. But when the road got rough, I discovered that their loyalty wasn't as steadfast as I'd imagined. It wasn't a dramatic falling out, just a gradual pulling away. A series of excuses that revealed the truth: their trust in me had always been conditional, based on what I could offer rather than who I was. That experience didn't make me stop trusting altogether, but it did make me more discerning. These days, I approach trust with a quiet caution. I've learned to listen not just to what people say, but to what they don't say. Actions, after all, speak louder than words. And it's in the small, consistent gestures that true character is revealed. The challenge, of course, is not to let caution turn into cynicism. I've met people in recent years who've reminded me that trust, though fragile, can also be resilient. A neighbor who went out of their way to help me during a storm. A stranger who returned my lost wallet without a second thought. These moments, though small, have restored my faith in humanity. One piece at a time. But trust isn't just about others, it's also about trusting yourself. That's a lesson it took me a long time to learn. There were times I ignored my instincts, convincing myself that I was overreacting or being too harsh. Looking back, I see how often my gut was right. Trusting yourself means recognizing when something doesn't feel right and having the courage to walk away, even if it's difficult. It means valuing your own peace of mind enough to protect it, no matter what others might think. At 70, I've come to see trust as both a gift and a responsibility. It's not something to be given lightly, but neither should it be withheld out of fear. Trust requires balance: walls high enough to keep out harm, but gates open wide enough to let in kindness, love, and connection. In this stage of life, I find myself treasuring the people I do trust even more. Those relationships, built over years of shared experiences, are rare and precious. They've stood the test of time, weathered the storms of misunderstanding, and emerged stronger for it. And while I may never trust as easily or as freely as I once did, I've come to appreciate the beauty of trust when it's earned. It's not about quantity but quality. And in that, I found a quiet peace. The world I grew up in feels like a distant memory now. It's not just the decades that separate me from it, but the way everything seems to have shifted quietly at first, then more rapidly, until one day I looked around and realized how different things had become. At 70, it's hard not to feel like a visitor in the present. Someone who remembers how things used to be but is constantly reminded of how much they've changed. When I was a boy, community was the foundation of life. Neighbors knew each other's names, their children's names, and sometimes even the names of their pets. There was an ease to those relationships, a shared understanding that we were all in this together. If someone needed help, it was offered without hesitation. And if you wanted to talk, there was always someone willing to listen. Today, that sense of connection feels harder to find. It's not gone entirely. I've seen glimpses of it in small towns and close-knit families, but it's rarer. Like an old photograph that's starting to fade. People seem busier now. More preoccupied with their own lives. Their screens. Their ambitions. Conversations are shorter. Smiles are quicker. And the spaces between us feel wider. Even when we're standing shoulder to shoulder. Technology, of course, has played a role in this transformation. I can't deny its usefulness. Video calls let me see my grandchildren's faces, even when they're hundreds of miles away. And a quick message can reconnect me with friends I haven't spoken to in years. But there's a trade-off, isn't there? For all its convenience, technology has a way of replacing depth with speed. It's easier to send a text than to pick up the phone. Easier to scroll through photos than to visit in person. The tools meant to bring us closer often leave us feeling lonelier. And then there's the pace of life itself. Everything moves faster now. News, trends, expectations. It feels like the world is racing towards something, though no one seems to know exactly what. I watch younger generations juggle endless responsibilities. Their faces lined with the kind of stress I didn't know until much later in life. Success has become a constant chase. And somewhere along the way, the joy of simply being seems to have been lost. I think about values. To what we prioritize and celebrate as a society. When I was young, success was measured by the strength of your character, the integrity of your actions, and the relationships you built along the way. Now, it seems tied to things that feel fleeting: status, wealth, recognition. None of those things are inherently bad. But they lack the weight, the grounding, of the simpler virtues I was taught to hold dear. Still, I try not to fall into the trap of idealizing the past. Nostalgia has a way of softening the edges, making us forget that every era has its struggles. Life wasn't perfect then, just as it isn't perfect now. There were divisions, hardships, and injustices that shaped the world I grew up in, just as there are today. But what I miss is the sense of balance, of feeling that, despite our differences, there was still a common ground we could stand on. I've often wondered if the changes I see are inevitable. Is this just the nature of progress? Or have we, in our pursuit of modernity, lost something essential along the way? I don't have the answer. But what I do know is that in this shifting landscape, it's more important than ever to hold on to what matters: connection, kindness, and a sense of community. Those things don't fade unless we let them. At 70, I've learned to navigate this new world with a mix of caution and curiosity. There are things I'll never fully understand: new technologies, new ways of thinking, but there are also things that surprise me in the best ways. Acts of kindness that cut through the noise. Young people who still value family and tradition. Strangers who smile at me on the street, reminding me that not everything has changed. This world may feel unfamiliar at times, but it's still the one I live in. And if there's one thing life has taught me, it's this: adapting doesn't mean forgetting where you came from. It means carrying the best parts of your past forward, even as the ground beneath your feet continues to shift. When I was younger, solitude felt like a punishment. I avoided it whenever I could. filling my days with people, conversations, and activity. Being alone seemed like an admission of failure. A sign that you were somehow unwanted or unworthy. It wasn't until I grew older wiser. Perhaps that I began to understand solitude for what it truly is, a gift. At 70. I've come to value solitude not as an escape from the world, but as a chance to reconnect with myself. It's in those quiet moments, free from the noise and demands of daily life, that I've found clarity. Sitting by the window with a book I may or may not finish. Taking a slow walk without any destination. Or simply sitting still and letting my thoughts wander, these moments have become some of the most meaningful parts of my day. But solitude isn't always easy to embrace. Especially in a world that values busyness and connection. I've had friends express concern when I decline an invitation or choose to spend a day by myself. Don't you get lonely? They ask. The truth is, loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness is a hunger. An ache for connection that feels just out of reach. Solitude, on the other hand, is a fullness, a quiet contentment in your own company. I didn't always understand this distinction. There were times in my life when I craved companionship so desperately that I clung to relationships and situations that weren't good for me. I stayed in conversations that drained me. Attended events out of obligation. And gave my time to people who didn't value it. I thought that being surrounded by others would fill the emptiness I felt. But more often than not, it only made it worse. It wasn't until I started spending time alone that I realized how much of myself I'd been giving away. Solitude taught me the value of boundaries, not just with others, but with myself. It taught me that it's okay to say no, to protect my time and energy, and to prioritize my own well-being without guilt. In solitude, I've also found the space to reflect on the life I've lived. At 70, memories have a way of surfacing unbidden. Like leaves carried on a gentle breeze. Some are joyful. Others bittersweet. But all of them are part of the tapestry of who I am. In the quiet, I've made peace with the mistakes I've made. The opportunities I've missed. And the people I've lost. I've come to see those moments not as failures, but as lessons, stepping stones that have brought me to where I am now. Solitude has also deepened my appreciation for the relationships I still have. When I do spend time with others, I'm more present, more attentive, because I know how precious those moments are. It's a paradox. Really, the more I've embraced solitude, the more I've come to value connection. Not the fleeting, surface-level kind, but the deep, meaningful bonds that enrich our lives in ways no amount of small talk ever could. There's a quiet strength in solitude. A resilience that comes from learning to be at peace with yourself. It's a kind of freedom. The freedom to let go of what doesn't serve you and to hold on tightly to what does. At this stage in life, that freedom feels like a hard-won prize. One I'll protect fiercely. Still, solitude has its challenges. There are moments when I miss the noise and bustle of a full house. The laughter of children running through the halls. Or the easy companionship of a shared meal. But I've learned that those moments, while fleeting, are enough to sustain me. They remind me that solitude isn't about isolation, it's about balance. As I sit here now, the house quiet except for the ticking of the clock, I feel a sense of gratitude. For the life I've lived. For the lessons I've learned. And for the stillness that allows me to truly appreciate it all. Solitude has taught me that I don't need to fill every moment to make it meaningful. Sometimes, the most profound insights come in the spaces between, when the world falls silent and all that's left is the sound of your own heart. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when my days were filled with people, friends. family, colleagues, neighbors. I was the kind of person who thrived on connection. Who believed that the more you gave to others, the richer your life would be. And for a long time, that felt true. But somewhere along the way, things began to shift. Slowly. Almost imperceptibly at first. I started pulling back. Now, at 70, I find myself choosing solitude over socializing more often than not. People sometimes ask me why. They say it with a mix of concern and curiosity. As if my choice to step away from the crowd is a mystery they're trying to solve. The answer isn't simple. It's not about bitterness or resentment, it's about peace. After 7 decades of giving, learning, and yes, sometimes hurting, I've come to understand something important: not every relationship is meant to last. And not every connection is worth the energy it takes to maintain. There's a quiet, unspoken truth about human relationships that we often avoid acknowledging. Not all of them are equal. Some nourish us, lift us up, and make us feel seen. Others drain us, leaving us questioning our worth or carrying the weight of unmet expectations. It took me a long time to realize this. And even longer to act on it. For years, I stayed in relationships out of obligation, guilt, or habit. I ignored the red flags. Convinced myself that loyalty meant enduring, even when it hurt. Now, I see things differently. Avoiding people isn't about shutting myself off from the world, it's about protecting my own well-being. I no longer feel compelled to keep toxic relationships alive or to engage with people who leave me feeling less than whole. It's a lesson that's both freeing and bittersweet. One I've embraced not out of sadness, but out of necessity. I avoid people who bring unnecessary drama into their lives and mine. I avoid those who only call when they need something, who never ask how I'm doing or seem to care about the answer when they do. I avoid people who take my kindness for granted, as if it's an endless resource they're entitled to tap into. Most importantly, I avoid situations that make me feel small, unworthy, or unseen. But this isn't to say I've given up on connection entirely. Far from it. I still cherish the relationships that matter, the friends who've stood the test of time. The family members who show up not because they have to, but because they want to. Those connections are sacred to me. And I nurture them with all the love I have left to give. What's changed is that I no longer feel the need to cast a wide net. A smaller, deeper circle is more than enough. In some ways, avoiding people has allowed me to appreciate them more. When I do spend time with others, it's because I truly want to. Not because I feel obligated. The conversations are richer. The moments more meaningful. Because they're chosen. Not forced. There's an authenticity to these interactions that I've come to treasure. Of course, there are moments when I feel a pang of nostalgia for the way things used to be. I think about the gatherings that once filled my home with laughter and life. The friends I've drifted away from. The relationships that faded with time. But I've learned to honor those memories without clinging to them. They're a part of my story. But they don't define my present. At 70, I've earned the right to prioritize my peace. To choose what feels right for me. And to let go of what doesn't. Avoiding people isn't about closing myself off, it's about opening my life to the things that truly matter. It's about living with intention. Embracing simplicity. And finding joy in the quiet moments that often go unnoticed. And so, I sit here now. In the stillness of my home. Grateful for the space I've created. Grateful for the relationships that remain. And for the strength to let go of those that don't. This, I've come to realize, is the gift of age, the freedom to live on your own terms. Unapologetically and without regret. If that means avoiding certain people, so be it. My peace is worth it. As I sit here reflecting on the years behind me, I can't help but wonder if others my age feel the same. Do the experiences that shaped me resonate with you? Is it just me? Or does time itself, as it weaves its intricate threads through our lives, make us more selective? I wasn't always this way. In my youth, I was eager to please, driven by a need to be everything for everyone. A good friend, a reliable family member, a supportive neighbor. I took pride in these roles. I measured my worth in how often I said yes, how much I could do for others, and how little I asked for in return. It was exhausting, though I didn't realize it at the time. Back then, I mistook busyness for purpose and approval for connection. But as the years passed, something shifted. Slowly, I began to see the cost of always putting others first. I noticed how often I was left drained, my own needs neglected. I started to recognize the subtle imbalances in relationships, the unspoken expectations. The way some people only seemed to call when they needed something. It wasn't an easy realization, but it was necessary. Now, at 70, I've let go of the idea that I need to meet everyone's expectations. I've stopped apologizing for protecting my time and energy, for choosing solitude over socializing, for setting boundaries where there used to be none. It took me decades to understand that it's not selfish to prioritize your well-being, it's essential. Does this sound familiar to you? Have you, too, found yourself pulling away from relationships that no longer serve you? Have you noticed the way time has a way of pruning the branches of your social tree, leaving behind only the strongest, most resilient connections? If so, know that you're not alone. This isn't to say the process has been without its challenges. Letting go is never easy. There are moments of doubt, of wondering if I could have done more to hold on. A friendship that once felt unbreakable but quietly drifted apart. A family member whose path diverged so sharply from mine that we can no longer find common ground. These losses, though natural, carry a bittersweet weight. But as I've grown older, I've come to see this shedding not as a loss, but as a gain. Each relationship that fades makes room for deeper connections, for moments of peace and clarity, for the things that truly matter. It's not about having fewer people in your life, it's about having the right people. Still, I wonder, is this something that comes with age? Or is it something that's always been within us, waiting for the right moment to emerge? Perhaps it's both. Perhaps the disappointments and betrayals of life teach us to guard our hearts more closely, to prioritize our peace above all else. Or perhaps it's simply a natural part of the journey, a quiet wisdom that unfolds as we move through the years. Whatever the reason, I've come to embrace this shift. I no longer feel the need to explain myself to others or to seek validation for my choices. If I choose not to attend a gathering or to step back from a relationship, it's not out of bitterness, it's out of an understanding that my time is finite and precious. I've earned the right to spend it as I see fit. So, if you found yourself making similar choices, if you've started to value quality over quantity when it comes to the people in your life, take heart. There's nothing wrong with you. This stage of life is about shedding what no longer fits, about creating space for the things that bring you joy, peace, and fulfillment. At 70, I've learned that living authentically means letting go of what doesn't serve you and holding on tightly to what does. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. And in this process of letting go and holding on, I've found a kind of freedom I never knew existed, a freedom to live fully, deeply, and unapologetically on my own terms. Does this sound familiar? If it does, then perhaps we're walking the same path. Each of us learning, growing, and finding our way. And isn't that, in its own quiet way, a kind of connection? At 70, I've come to see life as a series of chapters, each with its own lessons, joys, and struggles. This chapter, the one I'm living now, feels different. It's quieter, simpler, but also deeper. There's a clarity to it, as if all the noise and distractions of earlier years have finally faded, leaving only what truly matters. When you're young, life is about striving, reaching for the next goal, building relationships, and carving out your place in the world. There's an urgency to it, a sense that you need to make the most of every opportunity, lest you fall behind. But as you age, that urgency begins to fade. You stop chasing what's out there and start appreciating what's right here. This doesn't mean I've stopped dreaming or hoping. On the contrary, I feel a quiet excitement knowing that there's still more to learn, more to experience, even in the latter years of life. It's just that my focus has shifted. I no longer measure success by achievements or possessions, but by the moments that bring me peace and joy, a warm cup of tea in the morning, the laughter of my grandchildren, the sound of rain against the window. But this chapter isn't just about simplicity. It's also about acceptance, accepting the life I've lived, with all its triumphs and mistakes. I've learned to look back without clinging to the past, to appreciate the lessons even in the hardest moments. There were times I stumbled, times I hurt others or was hurt myself. And yet, those experiences shaped me, taught me resilience, and brought me to where I am today. At the same time, I've learned to accept the things I can't change, the people I've lost, the dreams that never came to fruition, the parts of my life that didn't turn out the way I'd hoped. These are all part of the story. I've stopped wishing for a different version of the past and started finding gratitude for the one I have. And yet, there's a paradox to this stage of life. While I've found peace in many ways, there's still a lingering sense of the unknown. What comes next? How many years do I have left? These questions don't frighten me as much as they once did. But they're there, a quiet hum in the background. I've learned not to dwell on them. Instead, I focus on the present, on the beauty of each day as it comes. One of the greatest gifts of this chapter has been the freedom to let go, to say no to what doesn't serve me, to release the weight of others' expectations, and to live life on my own terms. There's a courage that comes with age, a willingness to prioritize your well-being and to speak your truth without fear of judgment. But perhaps the most important lesson I've learned is the value of gratitude. Gratitude for the life I've lived, for the people I've loved, and for the moments that have filled my days. Gratitude for the strength that's carried me through difficult times and the joy that's illuminated the good ones. Gratitude for the simple fact that I'm still here, with more life to live and more lessons to learn. So, what does it mean to embrace this chapter? For me, it's about finding balance between reflection and anticipation, between holding on and letting go. It's about honoring the past without being trapped by it, cherishing the present with open arms, and looking to the future with hope. This chapter, though different from the ones that came before, feels no less important. In many ways, it feels like the most authentic, the most honest part of my journey. It's a time to live fully, deeply, and unapologetically, to savor the small, quiet moments that make up our days. If there's one thing I've learned in 70 years, it's this: life isn't about how much you do or have, it's about the quality of what you cherish. The moments. The connections. The peace you carry within. This chapter is about celebrating those things. About finding beauty in the everyday and strength in the stillness. And so, I'll continue to live this chapter. One day at a time. Embracing all it has to offer. Whatever comes next. I'm ready. For now. I'll sit here. Content in the knowledge that this, too, is a part of the journey, a chapter worth living.